Fairy Tail is beyond awful. I have been a long time hater of Fairy Tail for a while, and I have my reasons for it.
Fairy Tail is actually a good anime. Boy.
It is my contention, folks, that Fairy Tail is the absolute worst, most popular series in the world.
To start this video, I want to say something. I love Fairy Tail.
It was about 5 years ago today when I released a video talking about the manga and anime series Fairy Tail. And well, to put it lightly, that video has gone on to be a pretty defining part of my channel. It's one of the longest things I've made at 3 hours long, it's one of my most controversial takes to get traction, it's currently still my 6th most popular video, and I also don't really like it anymore. In fact, I haven't liked it for years. In fact, I've been talking it down since as far back as a year after I originally posted it, and honestly, I think that hatred is pretty justified given how much of it is just downright terrible. I mean, it starts out okay, with me actually analyzing the show and trying my best to deconstruct it, but you know, then I got to a point in the show I had never seen before and pretty much decided to watch it as I scripted, something you should never do, to clarify, unless you're a moron like me, and so it essentially led to me making a shitty recap I only sometimes interjected on with thoughts I'd more or less stolen from Nux Taku of all people, since I just hadn't given myself enough time to form my own opinion. Like, when I tell you that video is an overly long mess that barely says anything of substance after a while, I really mean it. And considering I was a 16-year-old who'd never done something that big in scope about a series that was so incredibly long, I feel like that was kind of a foregone conclusion. But hey, it's been 5 years since then. I'm an adult now. Okay, I'm 21, but I've been through some shit, alright? And I've gotten a lot more experience, so I think I can give a much more precise take on the series now that the goggles I saw it through back then are fully off. And you wanna know what I think of it now? You wanna know what I really think? Still pretty good. Yeah, I guess that reveal doesn't have as much oomph if you actually read the title or looked at the thumbnail, but you heard me right. I, just stop, 21-year-old Floridian man and supposed media critic, still think that Fairy Tail is good. And I don't think I was wrong to try and defend it all those years ago. It's just that I didn't know how to explain it without either giving a bare-bones summary or straight-up plagiarism. But that's not who I am anymore. Now I only plagiarize half my videos. None of my videos. But yeah, I've been wanting to redo this project for literally years on end at this point, and seeing as I've just gotten through a full reread of the series, which took me about as long as I was expecting it to, sorry about the wait, I feel like I'm finally ready to cover it. So with my pre-expository bitching and self-deprecation out of the way, Fairy Tail. What could I possibly say about this series that hasn't been said by someone else online? I mean, chances are if you clicked on this video, you've probably already heard a good couple people give their thoughts on the thing, and even if you haven't, you probably still know what the general consensus is. That it's trash, derivative, basic, lazy, boring, repetitive, the thing that might as well have invented using the power of friendship to fix your problems. Boobies. Like, seriously, if you look at almost any discussion online, unless it's the official subreddit, about 9 times out of 9, it's gonna be mostly negative, and it's been that way for a very long time. Really, in terms of just pure vitriolic hatred, I'm not sure there's almost any other popular anime that gets that same kind of slack except for, what, Sword Art Online, Future Diary, Seven Deadly Sins? There's not a lot of contenders. So, why is it that so many people also seem to like Fairy Tail? Or, well, I say like, I guess a better word would be backhandedly don't hate it? Like, look at this clip from Giguk's Black Clover video.
Fairy Tail.
See, this is what I'm talking about, this reluctance to say it was bad. You don't tend to see that with hated anime. Most people will just say it sucks. But with Fairy Tail, a lot of the time there's this hesitation, and I understand that feeling way too well, since unlike those other series I just mentioned where their flaws were just so obvious, I could at least see where the main consensus was coming from when I learned about it. With Fairy Tail, it was a lot harder since I just found it so inherently likable. A group of wizards in a guild of would-be social outcasts going on adventures together, solving each other's emotional, physical, and rent-based financial problems. That sounded like a blast to me, and as a kid, that's exactly what it was. I loved the characters, the themes, the atmosphere, the music. It was my fucking jam, and I also didn't know what pirating was yet. I mean pirating. So it was actually the first series I bought Blu-ray by Blu-ray to keep watching, since there really was something about it I just couldn't get enough of. Like, I wasn't quite sure how to say what I liked about it, but I knew that I liked it. Until I didn't. Because after a while, I started getting more involved with the internet, and when I looked up stuff about Fairy Tail, I saw there were a lot of videos calling it trash. So I looked at one to see what the deal was, and then I watched another, and another, and another, and another, and since at the time I didn't know how to put what I liked about it into words, the more my opinion was challenged by videos saying it was objectively trash, the more I started questioning whether I was wrong to like it or not. I mean, I knew deep down that there was something I still enjoyed, but if I couldn't say what it was, then maybe it was like what other people said. Maybe I just liked it because I was young when I found it and was still nostalgic despite knowing that overall it was bad, and that kinda depressed me for a while, since it made me wonder if I could trust my own opinions or if something was wrong with me. I didn't feel confident about what I liked anymore, so to cope, I essentially fell back on this sort of self-hating irony, saying I knew it was trash but I liked it anyway just so I could feel okay with myself again. And I stayed that way for a long time. Not that I really wanted to, I just figured that's how it is. I'm wrong. So when I actually did see someone putting those thoughts I discarded into arguments, even if yes, admittedly it was Nuxtaku, I've gotta say, I never felt more validated. Because I loved Fairy Tail. And ever since I realized it was okay to think that way, I've gone through it a few more times, and it's helped me to understand where I was coming from as a kid, since I still really love Fairy Tail, and it's not just for nostalgia or sentimental value. No, I legitimately think Fairy Tail has a lot of good qualities that most critics either seem to just misinterpret or can't see the value in since they're distracted by something else. And to show what I mean by that, I'm gonna do something similar to my boys comic video and say what I think makes it work by responding to complaints the series gets for each of those things. The first half will be about specific characters, the other half about more general issues. But before getting into that, I think first I should give you a little context so that even if you don't really know about Fairy Tail and still want to watch and potentially get spoiled on basically everything in this 500 chapter manga, you can more or less still follow along. And hey, for something extra, I'll even do it in the form of a response just so I can start this off right. So, at its core, like I mentioned earlier, the plot is about a group of wizards in a magic guild called Fairy Tail who pretty much spend any given arc taking requests for jobs and fighting villains while dealing with their own personal issues, whether it's trauma, neglect, abuse, or even people barging into your goddamn room. The specific group we follow consists of Natsu, a flamehead with a penchant for being a fucking menace, whether intentionally or not, Happy, his snarky companion and local marketable plush, as represented by this real, actual Funko Pop I physically bought once, Lucy, a meek celestial spirit mage who's basically just trying to stay alive most of the time as she can help it, Gray, an angsty stripper who's perpetually fighting his own PTSD and survivor's guilt, and Erza, an initially closed-off stoic type who's essentially the guild's mother, always keeping them all in line. From there, we also eventually follow Juvia, a moody rain woman who forms a bit of an obsessive crush on Gray, Gajeel, a grungy former enemy who goes on a path of redemption paved with cat-loving, metal, and shooby-doo-bopping, Wendy, a shy, insecure girl learning to use her shockingly large amount of power, Charlotte, Wendy's own uppity flying cat companion that sort of treats herself like a guardian for Wendy more than a friend, and all the other wacky, tragic, or wackily tragic guildmates that'd probably take me a long time to list off, so I'm just not gonna. Trust me, you'll come to know them by the end of this video, but these are the ones who get the main focus. By the way, side note, this character mostly gets localized as Carla in US releases, but her name could also be translated as Charla or Charles, and I personally think Charla fits her character more, so that's what I'm gonna call him. I know this is the most autistic thing imaginable to care about, and I'm not sure I even really mention her too much after this point, but as you'll come to realize with this video, I'm very autistic. But anyway, with all that in mind, the first thing you might be thinking is, damn, that's a lot of characters to keep up with in the main cast, and you'd be very right to think that, since on top of the ones I've listed already, there are indeed a shitload of characters in Fairy Tail who get attention in one way or another across the series. I mean, I haven't even mentioned the other proper guilds like Lamia Scale or Sabretooth, villains turned friend groups like Crime Sorcière and Arachion Seis, random important characters like Kagura, Mystigan, Porliuska, and so on. Like, these guys obviously don't get as much focus as the main ones by a long shot, but they're in the story way more often than you'd probably expect. And because the series is so incredibly focused on its characters, it's led to this sort of perception that a lot of Fairy Tail feels aimless, that it doesn't really have a point at the start and is missing a plot till around 200 chapters in. And I think the main reason for this perception is just that shonen fans aren't too used to loose narratives that lack a specific goal the cast are all constantly striving towards from day one. You know, it's cool there are series where they have a set plan from the opening page and stick to that plan their entire run, and the author of Fairy Tail has even done series that are like that, but from the start with Fairy Tail, it was clear the focus was more on just enjoying adventures, seeing these characters grow, and watching watching them tough it out so they can party and laugh and be as free as they want to when the fighting's done. It's not that it doesn't have a point, it's just that the point isn't always as much the world-ending stakes of whatever adventure they're going on as it is the growth from the cast we see as a result of it. I guess you could say it misses the forest for the trees early on before getting to the bigger story it builds up to over time, but when the trees all have so much to appreciate as we watch them change, what's wrong with enjoying the little details just as much as the big picture? Especially when the picture is made from those details. I mean, sure, you could just run through the forest as fast as possible to chart a path and reach the end, but with Fairy Tail, it's a little different, since it's overall just a fun-ass time that, technically speaking, could go on forever if it really wanted to. That's why even after it finished, it's been able to have a sequel series for over 7 years now that's still running. Though I won't be covering it in this video since I haven't read all of it. As long as these guys have adventures to go on and traits to be explored, it can keep chugging, and I don't see that as a bad thing, since these guys are just really entertaining to watch. Like, I don't know too many anime I can really say this for, but Fairy Tail is one of the only series where I intentionally go out of my way to watch the filler, since they're just fucking hilarious. I love seeing Juvia accidentally make everyone rivals and Erza arguing with a pillar. I love seeing Natsu, Lucy, and Happy trying to survive in an icy cave and hallucinating. I love the whole guild going on a stupid race using their powers, cause these characters work in casual settings just as much as the serious ones, and that's only possible because the series does such a good job at making them likable, giving them depth, giving them chemistry, getting us invested in their personal journeys, and seeing the genuine way they all lift each other up to be more than their individual parts. Which, hey, getting to my first character section. Natsu, the most generic lead in modern shonen. Or at least that's what it says according to CBR's 10 Worst Shonen Heroes of All Time list, where he ranks number 7, so, you know, it's not really up for debate now, is it? Alright, so Natsu is a guy whose main complaint seems to be that he doesn't grow enough over the series and isn't that unique for a shonen lead, which, hey, from a basic look, seems pretty valid. I mean, he does check a lot of the boxes. Brash, loud, strong, just as quick to fucking murder you as he is to ask for friendship, but I've never quite taken this complaint too seriously, since I've always felt like it looked too much at one half of his character without thinking about the other. See, when it comes to telling you what a character's all about in a story, there's usually two main ways to naturally show it, through their inherent traits and their relationships to others. And with Natsu, people seem to focus mainly on the former, which, yeah, like I said, when you look at them in isolation, aren't the most unique. Though I'd say he's far from being just straight up Tyler Tuskman, if you know what I mean. That's a deep cut for the real Just Stop enjoyers. I'm sorry if you're not a true fan. Like, sure, he's all the things I said before, but he's also a jokester troll, a naive optimist, a stubborn hardhead, and a guy that follows his instincts first who doesn't think twice about his decisions. I've heard him compared a lot to Luffy from One Piece, but I'd honestly never mix the two up just because, one, Luffy's more a chaotic ball of energy than Natsu, plus way more simple-minded. Two, Luffy is the leader of his group while Natsu isn't, which makes for a big difference in dynamics and how they act, and maybe most importantly, three, while Luffy's mostly characterized through his inherent traits, Natsu's mainly defined by his relationships to other characters. He's Gray's petty but supportive rival, he's Erza's fearful younger brother, he's Lucy's loyal but stubborn friend she can always count on. They're the ones who tell us who he is past his inherent traits. It's why for most of the series, but especially early on, the focus of arcs is always on one of them while he's the one giving support, so every other member of the cast can get fleshed out while opening up another avenue for exploring Natsu. For instance, in Gray's arc, Aluna Island, we see that while the two of them have this sort of bickering tsundere rivalry where they act like they hate each other, he still views Gray as a close friend and won't let him kill himself to run from his problems. Meanwhile, in Erza's arc, Tower of Heaven, on top of similar themes about sacrifice, because there's a surprisingly large amount of people trying to kill themselves in this, we see he also feels strongly about protecting her image and can't stand the thought of her being less than her usual scary self. You see what I'm talking about? The cast are a very important part of Natsu's character, and the reason it's set up this way is because Natsu, as Lucy's introduction to Fairy Tail, is meant to represent what they're all about. He's a friendly, welcoming, unpredictable rebel that's not exactly easy to control or even that respectable, and he might just commit accidental terrorism in the process of saying hi, but he's strongly devoted to the people he's close with, and so, in turn, they build him up the same way he does for them. It's a symbiotic thing, like this funny image of a frog under a mushroom I found when I looked up the word symbiotic. I mean, I don't know how both sides are benefiting here, but I don't want to use any other image, so yeah, one of these is Natsu. My money's on the mushroom. For real though, this is actually something that's established with Natsu from the first friendship we ever see he has, with Happy, who isn't really able to fight, being a talking, puntable cat and all, but can fly, which cures Natsu's biggest weakness, his motion sickness on moving vehicles. Boom. Symbiosis. They help each other out when shit gets tough, and one wouldn't be able to do nearly as much without the other, something that also describes how they act as friends. Speaking of helping each other out in fights though, that's another way they show Natsu's symbiosis with other characters, since if you look at almost any of his major fights, he pretty much never wins without someone helping him. No, really, go through all of them. It's a consistent theme. He wouldn't have beaten Aragorn without Happy, Gajeel, Jacob, or Franmalf without Lucy, Jalal without Erza, Loxus without Gajeel, Zero without Jalal, the Dorma Anum without Gajeel and Windy, Zonkro without Makarov, Hades without the team, Future Rogue without Atlas Flame, Margear without Grey, Zeref without Lucy and Grey, or, of course, Acnologia without literally the entire continent. The only times this doesn't happen are with low-level threats like Yuka and Toby, or, more famously, Sting and Rogue, who some of you are probably already pointing to saying that breaks the pattern and that I'm a fuck-up, which, hey, first of all, you don't need to state the obvious, I'm a YouTuber, I know I'm a fuck up, but secondly, yeah, it does break from the pattern because it's a subversion. You see, Sting and Rogue are these guys who got built up from the start as being a real threat to Natsu and Gajeel as third-generation Dragon Slayers, which I'm not going to go into too much detail about here, seeing as it's kinda complicated. Just know that Natsu and Gajeel are first-gen Dragon Slayers, they're third-gen, and I'm pretty sure 3 is a bigger number than 1, so intimidating. And it basically keeps going like this over the course of the arc, where they say that they're better than them, their guild bullies Fairy Tail during a tournament, there are a bunch of cocky assholes in the new #1 guild, so you assume they're gonna be like this massive threat that challenge Natsu and Gajeel when they eventually fight. And at first, that's exactly how it seems. The 4 of them are trading blows, it progressively gets more intense with them using bigger and shinier forms until, whoa, for a second it makes you think that they actually won, but then, whoa, it turns out Natsu and Gajeel aren't that fucked at all. In fact, the only reason they were taking punches for a while was so they could learn the two's movesets, and now that they do, Natsu's so confident he can win, he just pushes Gajeel away on a minecart to try and do it himself, and he fucking does. Now, some people have misinterpreted the scene as being a quote-unquote power of friendship moment, where Natsu just wins despite being so beaten up and battered since his friends are cheering him on, but that's not what this scene is saying. The point is that Sting and Rogue were never stronger, and the reason they were never stronger is because their guild was run like a militia founded solely on fear and posturing with nothing to give the two proper motivation or strength. It didn't help them bring out their potential since there was nothing they were fighting for, whereas Natsu and Gajeel had an environment that nurtured their resolve and helped them to go further, something we actually see happen with Sting in the aftermath when he thinks his cat Lecter was killed by his guildmaster and proceeds to blast the fuck out of him. So that means they have the potential to grow, it's just that Sabretooth was suppressing them. And considering Dragon Slayers are one of the few types of wizards who, thanks to their magic being ancient and thus more primal, can directly draw from their emotions for strength, that message of nature versus nurture is only more applicable. And it's not the only time Natsu's had an intentional trait that people took as a flaw for the wrong reasons, like the fact that he's technically kinda stagnant for most of the manga. You know, one of the big things people look for in a good main character is them growing and changing as the series goes on, which tends to come really naturally to shonen guys specifically since their main goals usually require them to get stronger, so through them improving power-wise, we can also see them growing as people. Deku from MHA starts out being this submissive and breedable baby bitch, so as he gets stronger with One For All, we can see that that coincides with him getting more confident and capable. It's classic shonen character growth. But Natsu doesn't really follow that structure since he just wants to help his friends when he can and find his missing dragon dad Igneal. His goals don't really require him to get stronger, at least most of the time, and that's definitely by design given that, like I said, most of Fairy Tail's arcs aren't about Natsu himself or him needing to grow. They're about Natsu helping others. See, it's all got to do with this concept called a flat character arc. Like, most of the time when people imagine what a typical character arc is, they're actually thinking of positive character arcs. Those are the ones where someone actively grows and changes because they need to improve a flaw. But there's also an equally valid option there with flat character arcs, where the protagonist doesn't need to change since they're already a fully realized person, so instead, they help someone else, which works especially well for a character like Natsu since his whole thing for most of the story is sticking to his beliefs and reminding the others who they are or what they need. He helps Grey not to run from his problems, Lucy to have confidence, Erza to value herself, Windy to trust in her power, and it's the fact that he mostly doesn't change that makes it possible. But that's not to say he doesn't grow or have problems at all either, since he 100% does. His rashness, his recklessness, his utter inability to plan ahead, he's got a bunch of obvious character flaws from the start of the series, and after a couple big moments here and there early on, once we really start focusing on his story in Tartarus, he ends up going through a fully realized positive arc over the rest of the series that we didn't even realize was in the works from as early as his introduction. Like, as soon as the literal first time we meet him, he's searching for Igneal, and whenever he gets the chance to find some information, he tries to follow up on it, but it's not until Tartarus when, after a bunch of other reveals, we learn that Igneal was actually inside Natsu the entire time, which... Okay, I know that sounds weird, and in practice, I'm not gonna lie, it kinda is. I mean, just look at this page, you'd probably think it was a meme edit, but it makes a lot more sense when you pick up on how the author Hiro Mashima just loves taking metaphorical things and turning them literal. And so in Natsu's case here, the idea is that the whole time he was looking for Igneal, he never realized that the only place he existed anymore was inside him because he was dead. Or specifically here, on the verge of death. There was never a way he could find Igneal since there was never a place to find him. You know, like, it wasn't clear at the time since we didn't have all the pieces, but once you get that final bit of knowing he was inside him, it's obvious Natsu's main story is about grief and never getting the chance to say goodbye to someone who died when you least expected it. Through Natsu's perspective, it seemed like his dad had just vanished from his life, so he had to go and find him, but in real life, it's basically an allegory for when a parent is in your life and then seeing as you don't really get the concept of death yet, it seems like they up and vanish when they've just stopped living. Something that only gets more tragic when you know Mashima's own father was an aspiring artist who died when he was young. Which actually transitions me pretty well into mentioning the rest of Natsu's arc about trying to live up to his dad's legacy and choosing what he wants to be. The way it goes is that after Igneal really dies fighting another dragon, Acnologia, Natsu decides he's gonna give his death meaning by killing the main series antagonist Zareth using the last bit of Igneal's power that's still inside him. Even to the point that when he learns he's actually a demon made from Zareth who will die if he dies, Natsu goes as far as breaking his own code for once and still tries killing him so he can fulfill that legacy. And as he struggles with who he is over the rest of the arc, whether it's a dragon, a demon, or whatever else, we're given a few of the only times in the series where the roles are reversed and the rest of the cast helps him to see clearly. First, it's by Happy, who keeps him from killing Zareth and himself. Then, when his demon half starts taking over, it's Erza, who helps him see what he's doing and that it's not him. Then, when his demon and dragon sides start fighting, it's visions of several characters he's helped to remind him he's his own person that can choose to just be himself. And then finally, it's Lucy and Gray, who work together to rewrite the book he was made from so Natsu can live unbound by the expectations other people wrote for him. Yeah, when I said that Mashima likes taking things literally, I wasn't joking, but it makes for a great way of coming full circle by having all the characters Natsu's helped over the series do the same thing for him. And it's also a great way of showing just how intentional his role in the story was. Although I will admit, I'm not sure I like him as much as the other main character, which has probably led to some flame wars in the comments already, seeing as Lucy sorta has a reputation in the fandom that's split between love and she's the most useless person who's ever existed. And considering the role she plays in the narrative, I can understand how people get the second impression. After all, on the surface, Lucy's main parts in the story are as the narrator, every girl, and newest member who's sorta catching up to where the rest of the crew is. So with just how often she feels vulnerable and underpowered compared to everyone else, I can get how it'd be a little annoying if that's all she was. But if you just dig a little deeper there, you'll see that on top of her having another role as a counter-opposite to Natsu personality-wise, she also starts out the series being the opposite thematically in the sense that she starts out needing help all the time due to her lack of experience. She needs help during fights, getting concepts, going on missions. Hell, her magic's even based on summoning spirits to help her in battle. So yeah, at the start it's clear she's really reliant on other people, but that's just it, at the start. Since while she might be by far the most frail and wimpy in the beginning, that also means she's got by far the most room to grow. And over the course of the series, there's pretty much no one else who grows more noticeably with each fight she has. So remember how I said all of Natsu's fights have a certain theme attached to them? Well, that's actually something that's done for basically everyone in the main cast. And when it comes to Lucy, the theme is that each of them either deepens her bond with her celestial spirits or gives her a chance to become more independent and self-reliant, meaning that each time she has a new battle, it just gets more and more obvious how much she's growing. Like at first, when we initially meet her, she's more or less using her spirits to get everything done for her, getting out of the weather, fighting her battles, solving solving her problems, but it always leads to her not having them when she really needs, since her magic is directly tied to how long they can help. Or in other words, her strength is their strength, and by extension, her weakness is their weakness. So for her to get stronger as a mage and as a person, she needs to get closer with them while proving she's capable on her own. So that's what she does. In her fight with Sherry, she learns how to force a gate closed so she can fight without her spirits. In her fight with Angel, she's able to sway the spirits' hearts by treating them like people instead of objects. In her fight with Byro, she's able to win without help at all using a weapon the spirits gave her. And this gradual progression all culminates in Tartarus when, after giving up her strongest and closest spirit, Aquarius, to save everyone else, she's able to grow even stronger through star dresses, which give her the same abilities as her spirits so she can really fight alongside them as an equal, just like how she's getting more reliable in fights with the rest of the crew. Now, as far as flaws with this system, I will admit that in being the most vulnerable, there are times it feels just a little bit exploitative, mainly with all the shit she suffers in Grand Magic games, like Jesus Christ, can she please get a win? But most of the time, especially early on, when she needs the support super badly, I think it's a lot more justified. Like, I've heard some people were mad she didn't get a proper big win in Phantom Lord, which is considered her arc, mainly because she spends it getting kidnapped and tossed around like a giant hacky sack, but given it's all about her putting trust in Fairy Tail to save and value her like she never was by her father Jude, I feel like her standing up for herself at the end is more than enough to show she still grew in the process. Not to mention that in her vulnerability, we get to see one of Lucy's other biggest strengths as a character: her earnesty. Since while Gray and Erza are distant, Wendy is shy, and Natsu is, well, complicated, Lucy's easily the most willing to wear her heart on her sleeve and take a risk being vulnerable to get those feelings across. Whether it's begging for Loki's life, standing up to her father, not wanting to get rid of Aquarius' key but doing it anyway, or even in the moments where she's really down, like when her win versus Flare gets stolen, or Minerva's beating the shit out of her, since she's always honest about who she is and what she feels, and she never lets these moments stop her from speaking her mind. She might not be the strongest of the group by a pretty big margin, but there's no one who's better at being bravely, unapologetically themselves. And just the same as Natsu, regardless of power, there's no way the group would feel complete if she wasn't there. Although, if we do want to talk about power... Okay, so if there's one character the fanbase seems to love, the critics seem to hate, it's probably Natsu, but Erza isn't far behind, and it mostly comes from how she's gotten this label of being needlessly overpowered, or even somehow a Mary Sue. Which, you know, honestly, I'm kind of naturally disposed to disagree with just because the term's been co-opted by the most pungent groups on the internet, but even without that, this always seemed like a dumb idea to me, since while, yes, Erza's the strongest of the crew, and yeah, she's got by far the best win-to-lose ratio, she's nowhere near invincible, and she's especially not perfect. In fact, she maybe goes through the most character arcs out of anyone in the guild, just due to how many flaws are so deeply rooted in who she is, even down to the type of magic she uses. Like, there are a couple characters whose magic says something deeper about who they are, cough cough Lucy, but there's nothing that's given more explicit focus for its symbolism than Erza's Magic the Night, which lets her change into a bunch of different armors she's collected that, as she gets explored, we realize not only has way too many seduction armors for her not to be doing it on purpose, but also represents the guard she puts up in front of people to keep them from getting too close and hurting her. It's a flaw we're first shown to when the person who created that insecurity, Jalal, puts her in a scenario where she's forced to confront it by learning to let her guard down for the ones she knows care about her, since putting up barriers has just kept them distant. However, that in and of itself also creates a new problem, since with her guard down, Jalal takes advantage of her, showing that guards can still be necessary at least from time to time. So with that in mind for the rest of the series, it sort of becomes a balancing game of her figuring out which is appropriate for handling Jalal as he changes over the series and makes her question whether or not she can let her guard down. And that's just her most obvious arc. There's also her personal fights between order and justice, self-sacrifice and living for others, overcoming trauma, recognizing weakness, forgiveness, so saying she's flawless just doesn't seem accurate. Unless, of course, we're talking about her design, in which case I fully agree she is flawless. Really, if anything, the series goes out of its way to say that while she puts up a strong front on the outside, she's got a lot that can get to her if people know where to prod. I mean, there are scenes of her crying, feeling hopeless, being brought to a point of almost breaking, and sure, they're usually there for the sake of her growing past them, but there are just as many scenes where she has to accept some flaws will always be part of her, or that she'd never be as strong at certain things if it weren't for the people around her. It's actually a pretty clever way of writing a strong character, since it lets her be the strongest of the group from the very beginning without ever making it feel like she doesn't have room to grow. And even when it comes to strength on a physical level, it's hard to say that she's overpowered when so many of her fights are won through logic and reason. Like, yeah, there are a couple moments people like to point to as being the power of friendship, which I'll get to in its own section, protection, but for a lot of her fights against strong opponents, one of the most common themes is that she has to use her wits to get out on top, and that's because her magic's sort of written to avoid being overpowered, which it easily could have been if Mashimo weren't careful. See, the thing about Erza's magic is that it lets her take from any number of different weapons and armors to help her fight, and early on we get some ideas of what to expect that's gonna include. Stuff with cool weapons, stuff that boosts traits, stuff with specific uses, and it's all given this air where, after a while, you can understand what kind of armor she'd most likely have even before she's used it. Oh, she's got an armor that boosts her speed? Checks out. An armor that glows? Makes sense. Armor for penetration? Wait, I thought I already mentioned the seduction armor. But that also doesn't mean she'll just always have the perfect counter for whoever she's fighting, at least not directly. Just take Ikaruga from Tower of Heaven. In that fight, Erza explicitly gets told there's no armor she can use to block her sword since it shatters everything. So for Erza to win, her only real option is to get rid of armor and give up defense entirely to put all of her strength into her sword, which, while she doesn't come out unscathed, is ultimately what gets her the win. Now, if her magic were broken, she could just say, "Nuh-uh, I got the most unbreakable armor ever," and then Ikaruga just wouldn't be able to cut it because she's so awesome and powerful. But that's not what happens. There's a logic to how she beats the odds with the limitations she has. The same's true for her fight with Midnight, where she can only counter his twisting magic through an armor that stretches and has to rely on learning his weaknesses to actually win, or in her fight with Gajeel, where she uses a water and wind sword to fight back since he's made of sand, but ultimately has to use her shining armor as a beacon to help Bisca snipe him out. These are all examples where she uses something we either know or could reasonably assume she'd have, a water sword, an armorless weapon, a stretchy armor, and lets the win come from not what it is she's using, but how she uses it. Almost like it's telling us that while she is powerful, her skillfulness is what makes the difference. Shit, that's even something that's evident when she does reveal a strong armor we've never seen before with the Nakagami armor against Minerva, since that armor completely drains her of her magic in seconds, meaning that if she wanted to use it at any point in the tournament, she had to make sure it was the right time, seeing as if she didn't, she'd be completely out of magic to fight anyone else, which is what happens. We even see what could have been with her if she had less restraint right before that with Kagura, who unsheathes her sword in a fit of rage and wastes her strength recklessly, making it easy for Minerva to swoop in and beat her. So yeah, needless to say, there's way more depth to Erza than most give her credit for. Which actually, while I'm on the subject of depth, hey, look at this cross. Just thought you might want to take a look at it. And no, Gajeel, I see you there. Don't you do it. Don't you even think about it. Oh, God damn it, Gajeel, that's your future wife. So another one of the big things people like to dunk on Fairy Tail for is that they choose to redeem a lot of their villains. And as far as I can tell, what makes it so hated, despite it being just so ungodly common in almost every shonen if you really look at them, is because for Fairy Tail specifically, it seems like their villains are either redeemed too fast or too easily for what they do. But honestly, I don't think that could be any more wrong if you actually take a look at these characters' arcs, and there's no one who gets that idea across better for me than my personal favorite character of the series, Gajeel. Now, if you've heard anything about Gajeel, it's probably along the lines of he ends up with the girl he literally crucified, and while yes, that is true, I cannot deny that, it wasn't nearly as smooth a transition as some make it seem. Like, first of all, as soon as Gajeel joins the guild after his last one, Phantom Lord, got blown to shit for attacking them, the first thing everyone does is make it very clear to him they haven't forgotten, and that includes the guys that got crucified, Jet and Troy, who decide to get payback by basically beating the shit out of him, which doesn't really make any sense at first, given Gajeel went toe-to-toe with Natsu, and these guys are literally some of the weakest in the guild, but it starts coming together more when Loxus, who's actually strong, shows up to do the same, and they realize, hold on, he's not fighting back. Which means that this whole time the equivalent of two Glass Joes were beating his ass, he was really just letting them get their licks in, hoping for acceptance once it was done. And he holds to that principle even when fucking Sandman shows up, only moving to shield the girl, Levi, when he goes after her. I mean, right off the bat, that shows he's willing to change, knows he did wrong, wants to be loyal regardless of the past, and that while he's not very emotional or open, he has some level of regret and kindness. It's not a moment that's meant to fully forgive him or even resolve the distance he has from everyone else, it's just there to show that he's not a total shit and he wants to change, which, after a couple arcs of him helping everyone out, finally gets closure on Tenro Island when, after teaming up with Levi for an exam, they run into weaker members of the Dark Guild Grimoire Heart and have a hard time. Something you'd think wouldn't be a problem with how the Tenro tree grants Fairy Tail members strength and protection when they're nearby it, but what if Gajeel just doesn't feel like a member yet? After all, he may have done his part to pitch in by now, threw a couple bucks in the communion basket and such, but ultimately, ever since getting involved with the guild, knowing what he did to them prior, he's clearly felt like a bit of an outsider despite the Master Makarov explicitly seeking him out. So it's no wonder he wouldn't get the boost of a full member until Levy showed him concern by giving him iron and telling him not to die as he protected her. Like, when Gajeel initially volunteers to help Levy, you could be led to assume he might have some ulterior motives, but as he genuinely jumps in to try and protect her, mixed with the idea of him not thinking he's a member, it seems way more likely he was doing it out of guilt he just wasn't willing to admit he still felt. So what could make him feel more like a member than being helped by that person he hurt and reminded that even if they won't forget what happened, the members of Fairy Tail still care for him? Of course, I can understand why some would take issue with Levy being the one to help, but I think it's actually really rational to have her show support first, seeing as there's no one who's got more of a reason to not like him. So if she can be kind to him and worry for his safety, that's obviously gonna hit the guy both as a member of the guild and as a person in general. Plus, he earns her acceptance after multiple arcs demonstrating his growth, so hey, why wouldn't their feelings be able to grow into something more when that initial forgiveness means so much for both of them? It's better than Vegeta and Bulma getting together, I can tell you that much. And it's not just Gajeel who gets this kind of treatment either. Pretty much all the major redeemed villains in Fairy Tail go through this sort of arc. Loxus gets banished from the guild and has to earn his place back after what he did at Battle of Fairy Tail. Ultir's whole story is about coming to grips with her actions and what they say about her as a person. Jalal spends literally the entire rest of the series trying to atone for his wrongs. Like, none of these guys get off free or easy. To the contrary, most of the time, them trying to redeem themselves becomes their whole thing. And really, if anything, out of all the series to do redeemed villains in general, Fairy Tail is probably one of the best and most consistent, purely because at least most of the time when the villain in question has done bad shit, it makes it a point to hold them accountable. That's how it goes for Juvia, Minerva, the Arachion Sei, Sabretooth. Frankly, the only one you could argue gets off a little too easy is Leon, but even then he didn't actually hurt anyone. And besides, even for all the villains that Fairy Tail has forgiven, there's just as many, if not more, who never get that kind of treatment. Let's see, there was Aragorn, Josei, Trinity Raven, Zero, Faust, most of Grimoire Heart, most of Raventail, Future Rogue, Diamante, Tartarus, Avatar, most of the Spriggan 12, and that's just the big ones. Not that I'm saying there isn't a lot of redemption, Fairy Tail definitely has more than average, at least presumably, but the series doesn't do it without reason, and there's plenty of times where they just don't, including one of the final bosses of the whole manga. And with this section, I know some people will ask why I don't have one for Zeref, the guy who's considered the real main antagonist of the series, but I do for Acno, who's comparably less important. And the explanation's pretty simple. People like Zeref. He's got an interesting personality, being calm and reserved until the world forces him not to be. He's got an interesting presence in that he looms over most of the villain's plans despite not trying to hurt anyone. He's got an interesting arc, wanting to reject the world like it rejected him and seemingly trying to bring it all down in the process. He's got an interesting relationship with Natsu and the first Master Mavis that's maybe the least controversial ship in the whole series. People like him. And so I don't feel like I have too much I need to say to defend his character. The same cannot be said, though, for Acnologia, who tends to get a good helping of shit, even in the community, for not being nearly as complex a villain as Zeref, but getting the final fights. And the truth is, he's not as complex. But that doesn't mean he was bad, or that him getting the final fight was a bad decision. Since while Zeref is 100% the more compelling villain next to Acnologia, who's barely got a backstory and doesn't have as much to go off, he does have one major advantage in that he perfectly sums up the manga's themes. You know, Fairy Tail is about the strength you can find in having bonds that heal the scars of your past, and Acnologia is a vengeance-obsessed force of nature that wants to be the last one standing. Now, you could make the argument that other villains sort of carry that idea too in one way or another, at least to an extent, but since Acnologia is just so intentionally simple with nothing else to block you from seeing that this is his character, that makes him by far the best at representing the pure opposite of what Fairy Tail believes in. So, knowing that, it tracks he'd be a villain who couldn't be beaten without the full force of not just the guild, but all the bonds they've made along the way. For Zeref, his character was closely tied to Natsu and Mavis, so they were really all that was needed for his ending to work. But with Acno, he's meant to be the thing that defies Fairy Tail's very existence. So if any villain was gonna get that big fight where the cast comes together to take him down, it was gonna be him. And that's okay. Zeref gave closure to Natsu's story, Acno gave closure to the story. And I almost wish that were the end of this portion of the video, since that would have made for a pretty killer transition if I do say so myself, but I've still got a few bits I haven't gotten to yet, so None of these were big enough to interrupt the bigger sections, so I've sort of been shoving them off to the side for most of the video so far, but I didn't want to go without bringing them up, so before moving on, I'm just gonna address them in this lightning round so they don't go unsaid. Cool? Cool. Okay, I wasn't sure if this was more a community joke or a serious issue that I needed to address, but I've heard more than a couple people say the Gray uses Ice Shell too much, and it gets on my nerves, so here we go. So, Gray's main conflicts usually have to do with overcoming the death of his master, Ur, who gave up her life for Gray by trapping a demon he was hunting using Ice Shell, a spell that turns the user's body into ice to trap an opponent. And so, as you can imagine, with his stories being about overcoming that trauma in its many shapes and forms, there's more than one time where he thinks about using it. And when I say more than one, I mean 3 times, since that's how many times he actually attempts it. Like, some take Ultir's suggestion to use it and his fake out with Silver like they were actual attempts, but no, as far as him trying to actually use Iced Shell, it happens twice on Galuna Island, the arc that's explicitly about him confronting his past, so makes sense, and it happens once near the end of Alvarez almost 500 chapters later when he thinks he's fucked up and doesn't have the right to live anymore. So in short, it's not that frequent, and the times where it almost does happen are intentional parallels, so just shut it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to yell at you like that. So, Juvia is actually one of the more divisive characters overall, and that's mostly due to large parts of her personality being shown through her obsessive crush on Gray, which a lot of people have said makes her badly written and one-dimensional. But that's honestly a disservice to her as a character, since she does have her own defining traits. It's just that they naturally center around Gray since he was the first person she felt serious love for. I mean, when you look at Juvia's first couple big character moments, what are their most common themes? Juvia worrying she causes unhappiness, wanting to be accepted, learning she can be open, finding her strength to live through the one she loves. Like, when you break all her scenes down to their bare essentials, her character seems pretty clear. She's a loving, considerate, anxious person with big emotions who's only recently stopped suppressing them, and so with no idea how to control them properly, that comes out in doing these big, stupid gestures for the one she loves more than anything. Does that maybe go a bit too far sometimes? Oh, no question about it, and the characters let you know as much, but at its heart, it all clearly comes from a girl who just doesn't know how to convey herself, and so goes as big as possible. She's not defined as a person by her crush on Gray, like if you got rid of that crush you wouldn't have anything. No, she's just a person whose traits are best demonstrated through that crush. Big difference. Okay, this one isn't too big a criticism, but I thought it'd be weird for me to have sections for all the other main cast members except for Wendy, so a couple times I've heard people say her progression is invalidated by the fact she stays moe, which is a phrase meant for characters founded on their innocence or cuteness. So if a character like Wendy is supposedly improving, how can she keep her whole cutesy demeanor the entire time? And the answer to that is that she doesn't, at least not fully. I mean, Wendy definitely is moe, she's very clumsy and shy and has way too many adoring fans for someone who's canonically 12, as most moe characters tend to be, but as she gets stronger and more confident in herself over the series, while her moe traits don't completely vanish or anything, mainly the running gag of her tripping over herself at the funniest possible moments, it's also insane to say there's no progress going from here to here. Like, dude, excluding the fact she has a clear chart of growth going from one arc to the next, starting out shy and scared, then reluctantly confident, then fully in control, there's also a moment where she cuts her hair, which if I've learned anything from anime is pretty much the gold standard for a cute character growing out of their helplessness. What more do you need? Alright, so now we're finally getting to the part most people were probably waiting for. The power of friendship. Everybody knows about the power of friendship. Anytime people want to complain about or make fun of characters achieving Nakama power in media, they use something from Fairy Tail. Even if they haven't so much as glanced at Fairy Tail once in their lives, the power of friendship is just so ingrained into the mythos of what Fairy Tail is, anyone can reference it. Majima himself has referenced it. That's how well known it is. And if you went purely off of message boards and rant videos, you'd probably think it was totally justified. I mean, according to them, the power of friendship gets used to solve literally every fight. Anytime the characters are on the brink of defeat, all they gotta do is think about their friends, get a sudden, inexplicable burst of energy, and then beat their opponent by thinking about how much they love their family. And you know, as someone who's read and watched the series multiple times now, I've gotta agree. There's no way I can deny that that series of events has happened a good 0 times. No, seriously, I'm being so completely honest right now. I've double, triple, quadruple checked this. I've documented all 207 fights in the series and categorized them with notes and everything. It doesn't happen, at least in that fashion. And you want to know why that is? Because when it comes to Fairy Tail, the power of friendship isn't this defined term with set parameters or anything, like some people might lead you to believe. No, it's a buzzword, or phrase, sentence, whatever the nomenclature. It's something that people like to broadly apply to the series whenever it does something they think is an ass pull or a cop-out or just straight up they don't understand at all but want to confirm their own biases with. Really, as long as friendship gets mentioned in a scene that's controversial, people are willing to call it the power of friendship. And I don't think that that's giving these scenes nearly enough credit for what they're actually doing, since a lot of the time there's way more to them than meets the eye if you're just willing to engage with them. And to prove as much, I'm gonna go through them all. Yeah, every major scene in the series that's considered power of friendship, I'm gonna put them under a lens to see just how valid or invalid they are from a narrative, thematic, logical, and friendship perspective. You want to be thorough? Let's get thorough. Number 1. Elfman doing a full takeover for the first time to save Mira Jane and Phantom Lord, and Mira doing a takeover to save Elfman in Battle of Fairy Tail. Now, I've never heard anyone complain about these scenes whatsoever, but they do have characters talking about their family while at low points and pulling off something powerful, so just in case there's any little wise guys who want to argue about it, I'm just going to clear it up right here. So the conceit of these scenes is that Mira and Elfman were both always capable of doing takeovers. The only reason Elfman didn't before was out of PTSD from initially not being able to control it and thinking he'd killed his younger sister Lizana, which made him scared to try again. All he needed to get past his fears was a catalyst, and his other sister being in danger was that catalyst. Same's true for Mira. Her magic had essentially gone into a catatonic state after the incident, and she found the will to fight again when her other sibling was about to die. Neither of these situations are power-ups or ass-pulls or anything like that. They always had it in them, they just needed motivation. For number 2, it's Erza taking off her armor to beat Ikaruga. And this is the first of many times I think people straight up just misconstrued the meaning of a scene, since, like I said before, while there is an obvious double meaning to Erza removing the boundary she kept up between her friends as she literally strips down, it does also work logically. Ikaruga was someone who could literally cut through any armor Erza could muster. She had to sacrifice all defense for attack if she wanted to win, and through finding the strength to let down her metaphorical boundaries, that's what she does. She puts all her strength into her swords. There's no ass pull. And number 3, and this is the first big one, it's Natsu eating a Therion to save Erza from Jalal. Oh man, Braxton, how are you gonna defend this one? Well, pretty easily, actually. Natsu's powers include eating elements to power up, so by eating a Therion, which is pure magic energy, he gets a boost. However, it doesn't come without side effects, since it's a cocktail of all sorts of magics instead of just fire. So after Natsu gets past choking the shit down because it hurts so much and has his temporary boost, he's pretty much out of the game for several chapters afterwards, meaning there's an explanation for how he does it and a negative side effect that's shown from the beginning. The only thing that links this to the power of friendship is the theme, which is that Natsu's choosing to hurt himself to save Erza without trying to up and die like she was by sacrificing herself. The whole arc is about living for the sake of your friends over dying for them, so that's what Natsu eating a Therion is meant to represent. For number 4, it's another classic, and that's Natsu accepting the Flame of Rebuke from Jalal for a massive power boost he uses to beat Zero. Now this is another one that's not hard to argue, it's just that a lot of people get the wrong idea and think that the Flame of Rebuke is like an actual spell. I mean, I've heard people say it's an ass-pull spell that comes out of nowhere, and there's a whole article on the Fairy Tail wiki saying it's this unique spell that forces someone to take on the sins of the person that gave it to him, but, guys, it's symbolic. The spell being called the Flame of Rebuke or Guilt or whatever, that's just a name Jalal gives it. It's a flame imbued with all of his power that he gives to Natsu as a symbol of them being able to trust each other. That's why the flame is golden. It's really powerful. Hell, Jalal even confirms as much over 100 chapters later during Grand Magic Games. It's not like this was a super duper ultra secret spell Jalal was like waiting to give Natsu or something without mentioning it. It's just a flame that, like I said, through Natsu taking it, represents him trusting Jalal enough to bear his sins instead of holding on to a grudge. And since Jalal's in a state right now where he basically doesn't know how to use his power, it makes logical sense he would give it to Natsu. That's all. At number 5, it's Erza beating Azuma using the power of the cast bonds. Wait, but doesn't that sound exactly like the ass pull you said doesn't happen, Braxton? Actually, no. I mean, yeah, this is the purest form of a character using the power of friendship to their advantage, but at the same time, the explanation given makes total sense. See, like I sort of alluded to in Gajeel's section, the Tenro tree granting its divine protection and power to fairy tale wizards is essentially a metaphor for their bonds as a guild. So when Azuma tries attacking her with its pure energy, it should really be no surprise that in the same way the guild shoulders and keeps Erza moving every day, the tree just keeps granting her strength. You know, it's supposed to be a physical way of showing the difference between Grimoire Heart, whose members are divided and only value their individual strength, versus Fairy Tail, whose members all lift each other up and give them the strength through their camaraderie. Which transitions me pretty well into my number 6 example of Fairy Tail versus Hades. Or rather, I guess it's just the moment when during their fight with Hades, Loxus, as a second-generation dragon slayer, transfers his power to Natsu, giving him the ability of a lightning flame dragon. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there's really no reason to call this an ass pull, seeing as Loxus giving Natsu that power doesn't win them the fights. Like, it's made very explicit that Hades would have beaten them all if the Exceeds hadn't found and broken his giant heart, followed by the combined unity of the guild taking him down. With that in mind, I don't see anything wrong with this scene, since it's basically an intro for us learning, hey, dragon slayers can consume each other's elements without it giving them the win. Not to mention, it's a symbolic gesture of Loxus, who's not in the guild at the moment, giving his support by transferring his magic to Natsu. So yeah, it was on the up and up for me. I mean, jumping off of that, I guess there's also people who don't like that Hades was beaten by having his heart destroyed, but I don't have a problem with that either, since it perfectly represents how Hades, in his stubbornness to move backwards instead of forwards, does everything he can to keep himself from changing. Natsu tells him if he's not willing to change, he shouldn't even bother living, and that's more or less exactly what he does by removing his heart from his body to extend his life. So, for me, it works. Moving on to number 7, it's Natsu versus Sting and Rogue in Grand Magic Games, which I've already explained for what it is, but in case you need a refresher since it's just been that long, Sting and Rogue were never going to win because they were never threats in the first place. And the thing that kept them from being threats was their environment with Sabretooth, which gave them no deeper motivation to win and suppressed their potential for forming bonds or the emotions that come with them. Something that's shown to help them draw out their power when Sting almost kills the Guildmaster after he thinks he killed Lecter. During this fight though, they didn't have the nurturing that Natsu and Gajeel did, so it was easy for Natsu to beat them alone. At number 8, it's Erza using the Nakagami armor to beat Minerva. What's the story here? Well, after Erza's brought to her wits' end fighting Kagura, Minerva comes out of nowhere to finish them off and claim the points as team captains, rubbing it in even more by bringing out their friend Miliana to show she's been sadistically torturing her out of boredom, as you do. With all this coming together to take her over the edge, Erza then responds by releasing her second origin, something she unlocked at the start of the arc along with everyone else, and using the Nakagami armor, an armor she's never used before that has the power to distort magic around it, to beat Minerva in 5 seconds flat. And so once again, you're probably asking, how can I defend this? To which once again, I tell you, easily. The reason Erza never used this armor before is obvious. It's too powerful. After all, it's an armor that's able to drain her entire second container of magic in seconds, meaning chances are, before this, she just didn't meet the requirements since she would have had to have been at full power and willing to completely drain herself almost instantly, which is probably why she held off using it or her second origin until this point. It was a glass cannon trump card she could only use once at the right moment, knowing she'd be empty afterwards. And like I mentioned back in her section, the fact she held it back till this moment is just proof of her restraint. Restraint that Kagura didn't have due to her rage, and Minerva didn't have from just not knowing what battles to fight, as shown through her excessive domestic abuse of Lucy and animal abuse of Miliana. She didn't have to do those things, she just wanted to since she lacked restraint, and ironically, it's the fact she lacked restraint that finally pushed Erza enough to show off hers. It's not that this was an ass pull, it's just that Erza knew what battles were worth fighting for, so it gave her the perfect chance to strike when she really needed to. That's what this scene is all about communicating. And the same can be said for number 9's example of Sting laying back during the last day of fights, biding his time until the final moment so he can fight Fairy Tail at full power, only to see them standing together despite their injuries, and conceding. Now, this is a moment that gets a lot of people fumed as hell, and to an extent I understand it. Like, what? That's the end? Sting has the perfect chance to ground Fairy Tail into pixie meat, but just sees them standing and decides to give up, letting them win the whole thing? Where's the final fight? Where's the action? Where's the struggle? But I'll tell you exactly where it was. It was in the fights that preceded it, where everyone in Fairy Tail only barely came out on top, and it was in this moment, which was the culmination of everything the arc was leading to with its comparisons between the two guilds. On one end, Fairy Tail treats its members like family and stands together with them, even if they can barely stand, since they're unified by a common bond that keeps them going. Meanwhile, on the other end, Sabretooth treats its members like a military who thinks friendship is dumb and gay, so its members' bonds only go as far as their loyalty to the guild itself, not each other. There's nothing about the way Sabretooth runs that fosters any sense of camaraderie or passion, so when Sting shows the literal power of passion through his bitch blast, Minerva's ready to use it by holding Lecter over his head. But this is the wrong motivation, since she's only encouraging Sting through threats and blackmail. It's artificial. He doesn't have a deeply personal or worthwhile goal that's driving him forward. He doesn't have a good reason to fight, and he realizes that when he sees the members of Fairy Tail, who, unlike him, who's standing alone, dick in hand after his teammates fought the hard part for him, are standing together for something they deeply believe in. Sting might have thought at first that he'd reached the level of Fairy Tail and could take them all if he wanted, and physically speaking at this moment he definitely could, but it's through their companionship that, on top of recognizing it'd be a cheap victory, he understands he's still nowhere near them. He can't win, so he concedes. Sure, it's not a typical punchy scream-off match that ends in a million bajillion explosions, but I honestly prefer it that way. Getting on to number 10, there's the often memed and often despised moment where, during Erza's rematch fight with Kyoka, she takes away all of Erza's senses and amplifies her pain to its highest limit, only for her to keep fighting. And after other characters speculate she might have developed a 6th or 7th sense to compensate for the one she's lost, the only explanation Happy can give is, it's because she's Erza. Man, I don't even know how people get genuinely mad at this, because it's obvious that for one, that's a joke, and for two, it does clue you into what's going on here. Okay, so basically, this is a reputation moment. You know, we're over 400 chapters in, we know what Erza's capable of, we've seen what she can do, and so Mashima creates this incredibly absurd situation where she's lost all her senses, she's got pain receptors up to the max, it feels like her whole body's getting destroyed with each strike, and yet still, she finds a way to keep going through sheer force of will. So that line Happy gives of, it's because she's Erza, is a joke in the sense that it's supposed to be over the top, but it's also a legit reason given the whole point is to cash in on all we know about Erza to have a moment that makes us go like, well, of course she did that, she's Erza. Like, if I could give an example from something that people really love for comparison, it's sort of like how at one point Luffy got struck with a poison that should have killed him, was given a hormone that raised his survival rate from 0% to like 2, and should have kept him down for days on end regardless, only for him to bounce back in a couple hours so he can try to save Ace. Now, if this were a character we didn't know, that would sound completely bullshit, but since we know what Luffy is like and how passionate he is about saving Ace, it's not that hard for us to believe, which in my eyes is equally true for Erza in this fight with Kyoka. And besides, Erza's arc this story was centered around the effects of Kyoka trying to break her through severe torture, and in this moment she's trying to do it again by literally taking away everything Erza has. So through her overcoming that pain and saying she can never take away the light of her friendships, as corny of a line as you might think it is, it's a triumphant moment for her spirit where, just like Luffy, she overcomes her pain through a will we've come to know she definitely has. Plus, just like Loxus helping Natsu back on Tenro, this doesn't ultimately stop Kyoka from doing what she's trying to do. It's just a good character moment for Erza that completes her emotional arc and gives us some memes in the process. Moving along to number 11, it's Natsu taking down a god of destruction in the Avatar arc, which is another one I don't really want to talk about since, come on guys, how do you not get what this is going for? But just to be thorough, the scene in question is one where, during a little war of sorts where a god of destruction gets summoned, Natsu decides to show off his year of training to be like, nah, and beats him instantly. And in my book, it was a fine moment. I didn't get what the big deal could have been when I heard people had problems with it, but now that I do, I'm only more confused. So apparently the thing that people get mad about this for is that they think it's a real anticlimactic way to end the arc, and a classic example of Mashima pulling some bullshit asshole instead of giving it the time it deserves, but guys, this isn't a serious arc. It's just meant to show that everyone's gotten so strong by now, their usual threats are fucking cake. Oh, you got a bunch of uniquely designed villains with weird gimmicks? Get that shit out of here. Wizard Army? Bitch slapped. God of War? One-shot explosion. Like seriously, this was never meant to be a big moment. There's nothing to get mad about here. It was just meant to hype us up for Alvarez, where the threats were gonna be on a whole nother level than what they're used to fighting. And speaking of getting mad about things that don't deserve it, that brings me to example number 12. You know it. You've heard Anitubers use it to say that Fairy Tail is trash. It's the Meteor. Oh boy, I bet there's no way I can defend this one, can I? Honestly, I don't even know why I'm asking this question anymore, because you know I can. Speaking on the moment itself, it comes when, during a fight with Erza's mom, Irene, she summons a meteor that's gonna crash down and kill everyone in the area. So Erza, with no other way to stop it, having her bones broken and only the strength left to use one arm, propels herself up and bursts through the meteor to stop it, getting Wendy to enchant her blade on the way down so she can strike Irene with one last attack. This is just because she's Erza again. No, for real, all this moment does is present us with an intentionally absurd situation where Erza can show off her willpower and, in this case, her want to protect those she cares about no matter the odds. It's another reputation scene meant to build up her character. And yet again, it's also a moment that doesn't sway the tide of the fight, since Erza can't do almost anything after the meteor is destroyed. The only reason she survives is because when Irene's given the chance to do what she set out to and take Erza's body, her will to live and triumphant smile in the face of literally impossible odds reminds her why she originally chose not to take it. That smile of pure joy and love that came from just being alive was something she could never bring herself to get rid of, no matter how hard she tried, and she dropped a literal meteor in an attempt to, so knowing she still couldn't kill Erza when given the perfect chance to, she pulls a sting and concedes by stabbing herself, putting an end to the pain she's caused, having realized there's still no way she can go through with it. Now, I've heard this moment get made fun of too, as Erza forcing her mom to kill herself, but it's completely rooted in the character. From the start, we saw Irene trying to make sort of proxies for Erza by enchanting swords to act as her subordinates. She tested the King of Fiore by changing his daughter into a mouse and asking if he could still love her, getting visibly pissed when he said he would. She spends all her time trying to suppress her emotions since she thinks sentimentality gets in the way of reaching your goals. It was all very well foreshadowed and hinted at over the arc and makes sense with who she is. And so we come to one of the big kahunas. Number 13, Natsu versus Zeref. Specifically, Natsu's punch of savage emotion. So, what do I make of it? I think it's fine. What? Were you expecting anything else? Okay, so context, Natsu's almost killed by Zeref now that he's got the power of Fairy Heart, the guild's secret weapon, but Lucy saves him by rewriting the Book of E&D so he can live without the book intact. Natsu then puts everything into one last punch, using his own body as fuel to burn time itself and knock Zeref down. The reason people are mad at this is because, for one, Fairy Heart is said to have a near infinitely refilling magical energy supply, and two, Natsu says the power of the guild will fuel his flame, meaning this is pretty much explicitly stated to be a friendship punch powered up through his feelings, which, yeah, that's what it is. It's a friendship punch, and honestly, I don't really mind, since that's not all it is. It's not like he was just on the brink of death, thought about his friends, and did this. Nah, he got saved by his friends, who healed all his wounds by rewriting the book, and in his passionate rage to do the same for them, goes as far as to burn his own flesh to fuel a flame that can knock Zeref down. And keep in mind, that's all he's able to do. He knocks Zeref down. He doesn't beat him. In fact, Zeref makes it very clear that this is probably going to slow him down for a couple minutes tops. The point of the punch wasn't to beat Zeref down for good, it was just to give an opening for Mavis so she could use the Curse of Contradiction and kill them both. Like, the punch didn't beat Zeref, Mavis did, so yeah, it is what it is. I guess some people wanted this to be more of a spectacular defeat, but for a character like Zeref, I kind of think this works better. But hey, don't worry. We do get a big spectacle at the end with our final example in number 14, the Dragon Slayers versus Acnologia, where at the climax of the fight, Natsu does another punch to actually finish him off, which people get mad at for being yet another friendship punch. But that's a bit of an understatement, no? I mean, let's talk some more about what went into that punch. So, for the punch itself, it's an infusion of all the power of all 7 Dragon Slayers put into one attack against a dragon, the type of being that magic is made to slay, who's unable to dodge or block it since outside of this weird Doctor Who time space they're fighting in, everyone in Fairy Tail conducted a raid to drag his physical body to a boat, which he has a weakness to, that he was then unable to leave due to everyone on the entire continent linking their magic together to create a giant fairy sphere around the boat, weakening him even further and keeping him in place, giving Natsu the chance to use all of his and everyone else's might in a single attack that's able to take him down. Why are you people mad at this? Like, legitimately, I know I said I get if you don't like it just to be nice in my original video, but I am being 100% dead ass right now. What's wrong with this picture? Did they not put in enough effort? Was there not enough planning to utilize every weakness Acnologia could possibly have? Did they not use several callbacks to give the thing a feeling of finality? Do they not foreshadow several of their methods before they're enacted? Does this not fully encapsulate Fairy Tail's main idea of Bonds being able to overcome those who choose to fight the the world alone? No to all of those? So why are you mad? Like, I get there was a lot of escalation going from the Wizard Saints to Serena to Acnologia just to hype up how incredibly strong he was, but by every conceivable metric, how was this win not earned? What more could they have done to beat him? It just feels like complaining for complaining's sake, like, oh, it's a friendship punch, cringe. And frankly, if that's your best reasoning for why this fight doesn't work, then let me say that you, sir, are bitch-made. You lack whimsy, you lack media literacy, you lack hose, and I lack any patience for it. Look, I know I'm not supposed to go after the people I'm arguing against if I want them to take my argument seriously. Like, I need to be cordial, I need to be understanding, I need to give them the benefit of the doubt, treat them as intelligent people, yada yada yada, and for the most part in this video, I have tried to, but on this one point specifically, nope, fuck you, I'm not having it. I have contained my rage for as long as possible, but I shall unleash my fury upon you like the crashing of 1,000 waves! But maybe this still isn't enough. And you know what? I get it. I mean, even if I have explanations for everything, even if I can justify these wins to you over and over again using subtext or symbolism or statements by the characters, people will still call these asspulls. They'll still call Natsu vs. Zero an asspull because he gets his win from an outside source. They'll still call Erza and the Nakagami armor an asspull because we hadn't seen it before. They'll still call Acnologia losing an asspull because it's a friendship punch. And really, I feel like that just speaks to the main point I've been trying to make by describing all these fights and their deeper meanings. That Fairy Tail doesn't act like a typical battle shonen. Okay, I waited for you to stop laughing. You can kill me now. No, but seriously, when you look at how Fairy Tail handles a majority of its main fights, they're actually very different in where their appeal comes from compared to your typical shonen. Like, I know I've used One Piece for a couple examples, probably because Fairy Tail gets compared to it so often, but let's look at the difference between Luffy versus Crocodile and Natsu versus Jalal. So, on a surface level, these two fights have a lot in common. Both the villains have hurt and tricked characters close to the MC, both are established to be out of their MC's leagues, and both end up losing, at least partially, through the MCs hurting themselves. So what's the really big difference here? Well, if you asked a One Piece fan, they'd probably say it's that Luffy was clever and used Crocodile's weakness to liquid by hitting him with his blood, while Natsu just ate some shit to get a fuck you power up and won without using his brain. But that's looking at it from the wrong angle. Like, let me ask you something else. What are the points of these fights? Not how did they win, or is this an asspull, just what are these scenes trying to do aside from beating their respective bad boys? I'd say that in One Piece's case, it's to have a creative fight where Luffy uses his mind and weirdo powers to overcome another weirdo's powers, which hey, on that front, it does a good job at, just like it works for most One Piece fights. In fact, that's kind of the whole deal with One Piece. It's built to have creative fights where a lot of their power comes from how creative the winner is, and the same goes for other shonen. Hunter x Hunter, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Jujutsu Kaisen, Dandadan, even the king of them all, Zatchbell. But do you know what that emphasis on creative fights means? It means that they're not required to have a deeper meaning. Take Crocodile versus Luffy again. Yeah, Luffy's beating Crocodile to help Vivi, and so it makes for a great fight. We'd love to see Luffy win, but what symbolic meaning do we get from it? How does it sum up the themes of the arc in a satisfying way that completes whatever journey the cast was going on? And follow-up question, how does that apply for Luffy versus Enel, or Rob Lucci, or Gecko Moria? It doesn't. And that's fine, because that's not the point of the fight, or almost any fight in One Piece. But in Fairy Tail, it's almost always the point. Like sure, from a typical shonen perspective, Natsu vs. Jalal isn't a great fight since he doesn't come up with a special technique or strategy. There's no badass maneuvers or blood fist fighting. It's just Natsu deciding he's gonna eat a glowy rock to save the day. Oh wow, Natsu, good job, you fucking fraud. But hold on, let's look at the context surrounding the fight that led us here in the first place. So up to this point in the series, a big trait of Erza's has been that she's willing to put her life on the line to protect the guild. She drained her magic to chase Aragorn, she protected the guild from the Eclipse Cannon, she went to the tower to fight Jalal alone, and now she's willing to die to stop him while letting the others get away since she wants them to all live happy lives. But like we see after the fight in Erza's vision of the future, they can't live happily if she's dead. It'll only cause them more pain and suffering. She might think it's for the greater good if she dies protecting them, but it's only gonna be made worse by the hole her death would leave in their hearts. And that's why Natsu's sacrifice of eating a Therion is so important here, since he's willing to put himself at risk, same as her, but it's not because he doesn't value himself or his life, it's the opposite. He knows exactly how much he's valued by his friends, including Erza, and so in eating a Therion, though it's painful, he's willing to keep going as long as there's even a small chance it'll help them make it out of there alive. I mean, sure, like with Erza, it's reckless, but it's the intention here that makes all the difference. Erza's sacrifices were made with the intent to die, Natsu's isn't. He's pretty much at showing her why her thinking is wrong by going about it the right way, which from a typical shonen standard might seem like bullshit for not being quote-unquote earned, but for what Fairy Tail's trying to do, it works great, since the point of the fight isn't just, let's figure out how to beat Jalal's star magic, ooh! It's, let's use this setup to teach Erza a lesson so she can understand how much she means to people despite constantly shutting them out. It's about the symbolism, the narrative, and that's what all the other scenes I've mentioned are doing too. They're using the fights and what happens in them to convey the theme, or resolve an arc, or say something else beyond just, he punched gooder than the other guy who punched. And look, that's not to say they're allowed to make no fucking sense, there has to be a flow of logic here for it to work, but whoa! Would you look at that? I just spent most of this section explaining all those things and the logic behind them. What a coincidence! I think the term to explain this discrepancy is something I call normalcy bias, which is pretty much to say that a lot of the time people will confuse standards and tropes with unshakable rules you can never break. For example, it's standard for YouTubers to have a consistent upload schedule. It's like how most shonens have their love interest character get with the MC by the end of the series. You know, that's something you see in almost every single mainstream shonen, but it's not the rule, it's the standard. It's not something factual like the 180 rule, it's just what everyone else is doing. So if you've got reason to change it, then go ahead. Make a loveless shonen protag, give him 0 bitches. Or for Fairy Tail, make it so beating the weird guy creatively isn't always as urgent as giving meaning to what surrounds the fight. Take the joy that comes from how did they win in the most creative way and move it to what does that win mean? Why did they do what they did to win? What do the characters' choices say about their growth? I mean, you wonder why people get so attached to this cast? It's thanks to the weight that their respective fights carry. Not that that's always how they do it, there are loads of fights where creativity is the key to winning, case in point Gray, and as I've shown, they aren't illogical, they're usually just more character-focused, but still, that distinction should change the way you look at them when that's clearly what they're going for. Like, I could have easily said, One Piece is trash for not having that many thematic fights, fuck it. But I didn't, since most of the time it wasn't trying to do that. And also because One Piece fans scare me. You know, going back to the infamous meteor scene and how supposedly bad it is, I feel like the people who put so much emphasis on whether or not Erza could physically do it from a power scaling perspective are missing the intention, since by this point in the fight, it's clear that Erza's completely outmatched. Like, the moment Irene turned into a dragon, broke Erza's bones, and summoned a meteor to crash into Earth, we didn't need to wonder, how's Erza gonna win? Because it's very obvious that she can't. That's not the point anymore. The point is that even when that's so blatantly obvious, and theoretically Erza should just lay down defeated like Irene expects her to, she keeps going. Even when she's got to go up against a literal meteor, even when she's only got one good arm to launch herself, even when the only way she can fight anymore is through headbutting right into her own sword. Since no matter how impossible the situation is, Erza's never gonna lose her resolve. And that's how she wins out in the end, because although she's powerless and with no way at all to physically win, her will to live and the smile she does it with makes it impossible for Irene to actually finish her. I mean, it's such a great human moment for both of them, but nobody really talks about it since they're so caught up on the question of how could she stop the meteor, even though the whole idea is that it's supposed to look impossible. Like when Zoro had to take all of Luffy's pain from Thriller Bark, we're not thinking, whoa, how is Zoro gonna do that? Or, whoa, how is Zoro able to stand when he's lost all that blood? We're thinking, whoa, Zoro is so committed to the crew, he'll endure any pain for their sake. And it's the same thing for Erza. The power of the scene doesn't come from the size of the challenge itself, but what the character's willingness to face that challenge says about them. See, it's all about viewing things from the right perspective. So if you want to criticize Fairy Tail, feel free. Just do it for the things that it's actually trying to do. And by that same metric, don't tell me there's no reason to be invested because of it having
You don't let me down.
So this is a weirder one I've seen floating around, but essentially what it boils down to is that there's no reason to watch Fairy Tail because it's predictable. No one ever dies, the cast never loses, almost every death that could happen is a total fake out, so what's the point in caring? And honestly, this is another one of those complaints that's always baffled me for how simple it is. Like, if I wanted to, I feel like I could probably counter this in a sentence or two, but yeah, let's dive into each of those statements one at a time to be really fair. No one ever dies. To an extent that's true. There's almost never a major, morally good character in the series that dies, or might as well have died aside from Simon. And Jude. And future Lucy, Ultir, Silver, Ignil, Zara, Mavis, Lahar, and the Grand Magic Council, technically Wendy's Master Roboul, Zareth, and August if you want to be generous. Okay, hold on. Anyway, moving on to the cast never loses, Yeah, they do. Like, across the series, Natsu loses to Fukuro, to the Arashi Seis and Zero, to Guildarts, to Blue Note, to Acnologia, to Future Rogue, and to Silver. Plus, on top of that, Gray loses to Leon and Bixlow, Erza loses to Jalal, draws with her Edalus self, and physically loses to Irene, Lucy loses to Juvia, Minerva, and Brandish, Juvia loses to Vidaldis and Invel, Elfman loses to Rusty Rose and Sayla, Mira loses to Azuma, Makarov loses to Hades, and of course, Gajeel loses to Minecart. But wait, maybe this is just an exaggeration of saying how the fights in Fairy Tail are too basic and play out the same, which, yeah, I guess that's not entirely wrong. Like, yeah, if you boil down the fights to their spark notes, Natsu does eat something special for a power boost around 4 times. But even with Natsu fights, there's still loads of variety. The Aragorn fight has Happy using his anger against him, he's pretty clever in his fight with Yuka and Toby, a team effort takes down the Droma Anim, the 3v1 versus Kane is pure comedy, the Sting and Rogue fight's a flip on expectations, the Mard Gear fight has him being sidelined so Gray can get the kill, there's his fights with Franmalf and Jacob and Jackal. I mean, none of these follow most of the typical conventions you'd expect from a Natsu fight according to the internet, and these are the majority of his fights. Not to mention, this is me just going over one character. If I wanted to go through all of, say, Gray or Lucy's fights, we'd be here all day. But you get what I'm saying. It's just not a very valid thought to me that the fights are all the same and nobody loses when both of those things are completely untrue. Ah, but the smoking gun, Braxton, the smoking gun. You cannot deny that Fairy Tail has a lot of fake-out deaths. I guess? I wouldn't quite say there's an unforgivable amount of fake-outs. Let's see, there was Erza in Tower of Heaven, Leon and Arashi Seis, Mira and Tenro, Windy and Tartarus, Gajeel, Juvia, and Makarov and Alvarez, so 7 times? Most of which are in 2 of the last arcs that do have multiple legit deaths. That's not too bad. And besides, most of them have a reason to happen like they do. Erza's fake out shows her what life would be like if she sacrificed herself and why it's not a good idea. Leon's fake death gives us a taste of what Nirvana could do with Sherry being taken over by her dark thoughts. Windy's near-death stopping face gives impact to learning there's thousands of them they need to destroy. Gajeel's near-death gives him a chance to be open and honest in a way that he could never be in pretty much any other circumstance. Juvia's fake out is what pushes Gray over the line into fighting Natsu. And even Makarov's resurrection in Alvarez, as maligned as it is, including by me at one point, comes from the idea that with Mavis and Zeref's deaths, through the curse of contradiction, they gave something life. In a sense, letting Mavis atone for killing Makarov's mother when he was born by bringing him, the thing that taught her the meaning of life in the first place, back after his sacrifice. Can you still hate the moment and think it ruined a good send-off? Sure, but it wasn't just done because Fairy Tail can't kill off its characters. Now, I will admit there are a lot of ambiguous moments where something happens to a character and you're supposed to think, whoa, are they dead? But really, that's just the consequence of a weekly shonen where you've got to keep reader numbers up however you can. Not that it isn't a problem, it's definitely annoying, at least if you read week to week, but it's more so a problem with shonen in general than just specifically Fairy Tail. So while I won't say it's not a valid complaint, I also don't think it's a very unique gotcha either. And when it comes to actual fake-out deaths, where for a while they're explicitly thought to be dead and it turns out they aren't, Fairy Tail is honestly ahead of the curve again just for how most of its fake-outs actually, well, serve a purpose. But wait, maybe this is just another exaggeration of the claim that Fairy Tail doesn't have enough permanent death, making the stakes and thus the investment feel so much weaker. In which case I'd have to respond by going, ha! Cause like, what? Can you seriously not get invested in something if it doesn't have characters dying off left and right? Is that really your marker for a story having stakes? I mean, don't get me wrong, that sort of thing can add tension. Some of my favorite series are Kaiji and JoJo's, and people are getting shanked in those series every couple of chapters, but out of all the series the thought of not enough death could genuinely apply to, I feel like Fairy Tail is maybe one of the worst examples you could use to justify it, seeing as the series' whole philosophy on death is contradictory to that idea. You know, I've already brought it up a few times over the course of this video, so it feels a bit tedious to repeat, but in Fairy Tail, almost every character who tries to throw their life away gets scolded for it, and that's because probably the manga's most recurring theme is that dying for the sake of dying isn't gonna change anything. It doesn't solve your problems, it doesn't make the people around you happy, it doesn't fix the mistakes you've made, it just causes more suffering so you can run away from your problems. That's how it was whenever Gray used Ice Shell, when Erza went to the Tower of Heaven, when Ultir tried ending herself. Like, if there's one theme aside from the worth of bonds that Fairy Tail just beats into your head more than anything else, it's that you should live for those you love instead of dying for them. That's why the actual deaths and sacrifices the series has hold so much weight, since they're exceptions to that rule. Silver getting killed doesn't just hit because he died, it hits because he asked Juvia to do it, knowing Gray could never get over his trauma if he stayed a living puppet. His reason for dying is completely justified in the narrative, and the fact that deaths are so rare in Fairy Tail only adds to that raw emotion. The lack of death is what makes it hit that much harder. Quality over quantity, baby. Though, then again, when it comes to Fairy Tail, if my examples are anything to go by, it's got both. And even if it didn't, it's still super engaging just for the cast and the arcs they have as told through their fights. So again, I'm sorry, but I just don't see it. And hey, speaking of seeing, in the 4 variety, look, I've only got so many good transitions. Okay, so let me pose yet another question here. How many of you have heard that Fairy Tail had absolutely zero planning? Because personally, I've heard that line so many times it's kind of annoying. And that's not even to say that it's totally wrong. It's true that Mashima didn't come into the thing with a formal plan. The guy's admitted as much himself. But I hate how it's used as this demeaning thing, like, oh, of course Fairy Tail is garbage, Mashima never even planned the thing. When there are plenty of series that didn't have too much worked out at first, but turned out perfectly fine. And even disregarding that it's not even that much of a problem, while it's clear Mashima didn't have everything planned out from the beginning, that doesn't mean he was coming in blind to every single arc. I mean, if you read the afterwords of the volumes, you can even find him showing how he makes general plans for how to structure things. Like, how else do you think these arcs were able to cohesively wrap themselves together in a way that builds up to their climaxes? You think he just did that shit on the fly? No, he plans it out, he just doesn't plan everything. He leaves the details for certain elements and story threads open in case he comes up with a better idea. He lets himself take the story in new directions if he comes up with a really good change. He doesn't treat it like a strict guideline, that's all. You know, there are a couple quotes where he says something along the lines of, I don't even know what's gonna happen next, but he's clarified before that that just means he doesn't know which of multiple outcomes he's been considering he'll choose for a conflict. It's not nearly as simple as him just fucking winging it every chapter hoping it turns out okay. And this applies to several other parts of the plot too, seeing as he might not have had all the details figured out from the start, but he clearly had the groundwork for loads of them done way before they were properly revealed. You want proof? Let's go through every big piece of foreshadowing I can think of, fuck it. On the opening page of the manga, the first 2 characters we're introduced to are Jalal and Ultir. That alone should tell you a lot about how much Mashima planned out their importance, considering their positions matter a lot to the first couple story arcs. But if you want to get explicit, as early as chapter 23 we get hints at his and Erza's backstory revealed over 50 chapters later. Then, as early as chapter 2, we're introduced to the main members of the guild and their quirks, all of which end up foreshadowing the arcs their characters go through later in the series. Technically speaking, the one with the longest lasting implication is Kana, who doesn't get her trait's origin shown until chapter 232, so that's 230 chapters worth of foreshadowing. And if you want to argue there's no way he originally planned all their backstories, the original idea with Fairy Tail was that Natsu, Lucy, and Happy would go on adventures with different characters every arc. It's just that the first few with Gray and Erza were well received, so Mashima shifted course. But he has gone on record saying the guild members' backstories were some of the first things he came up with, and if they weren't, then shit, he really knows how to improvise. Same with Mystigan. As early as chapter 24, he's using his staff and covering his face. 2 things that end up being really important to his identity were told about 143 chapters later. But to be really fickle, we actually see his face as early as chapter 120. Plus, we're introduced to Charlotte in the arc after this happens, so him and the whole Edalus arc were definitely planned at least that far in advance. We also learn about guild arts in chapter 24, which is 142 chapters before we meet him after a lot of buildup. Going back to Ultir, her real intentions of wanting to summon Zareth or use his demons are shown to us starting in Galuna Island, which is 70 chapters before we learn she was manipulating Jalal, and in another moment of foreshadowing, get a glimpse of Master Hades and Grimoire Heart 28 chapters before learning about the Barum Alliance, and over 100 chapters before he's properly introduced as a follower of Zareth, who, speaking of, we get hints about all across the manga from almost the start, is introduced saying he wants Natsu to kill him over 200 chapters before we learn what that means, has machines and demons that we only learn in retrospect were either meant to kill him or revive Natsu, and I don't even need to go into all the foreshadowing that Natsu is E&D or that he's from the past. Like, do you need me to bring up how him and Gajeel can't pass a barrier for old people almost 350 chapters before we learn why that was? Cause that happens. Anyway, moving on, we've got Natsu vaguely recognizing Wendy's name 300 chapters before that's revealed, Charlotte seeing a vision of events on Tenro before that happens, and the same same with Grand Magic Games. We get a glimpse of aged-up Romeo several chapters before the time skip, Gajeel tells Sting not to whine about a missing point later, and what do you know, by the end of day 3, that's how far they're ahead, a bunch of foreshadowing about the Eclipse project, Yukino says she was separated from her sister long before we learn it's Angel, we get a hint at Silver's true nature by how he froze Atlas Flame thinking he was a demon, and there's probably several more that I missed, but at this point, I think you get it. Fairy Tail has a lot of foreshadowing and planning, but more importantly than that, it has thought put into it, which I think is the real heart of what people are trying to say it doesn't have by claiming it wasn't planned. They want to prove that it doesn't have thought put into it, since how else could the characters win certain fights like they do? How else could it have several plot beats they don't personally agree with? But again, I feel like a lot of this goes back to just not liking Fairy Tail because it doesn't conform to the standards other series have set. Like for instance, when you have two rival characters like Natsu and Gray, it's pretty common for them to end up fighting. Something like Naruto and Sasuke, Goku and Vegeta, Deku and Bakugo, what have you. And so in chapter 504, when the two of them fought and it ended without there being too much focus on the fight itself, people got mad. But the scene in question wasn't about having a cool fight between Natsu and Gray. It was about two characters who are normally friends being pushed past petty rivalry by the wills of their fathers and the wants of people beyond themselves. If you look at the fight from that angle, it works exactly as intended, but a lot of people don't. They just see that they didn't get the thing they initially expected, and so they call it a cop-out. The same's true for Natsu not having an active goal, him and Lucy not getting together, so many villains being redeemed, the climax not being this 20-chapter long fight. There's nothing wrong with any of these in isolation, and Fairy Tail doesn't try to make you think it'll do something else, but it's not the way that people want, so to them, that means it's bad. That means there was no thought put in at all. That the whole thing's a cop-out. That the only things it's got are hot girls and assholes and the feeling of investment to trick you into thinking there's something more when it's all bullshit. And it's that sentiment that helped me understand why my old video blew up as much as it did. So, I've made it clear by now that I don't like my original video, and I stand by that statement because I think it's too long, it doesn't say that much, it repeats other people's points without really having a point of its own. Like, just in general, it's not a video I like to remember for how little it had going on, but even so, after going through the process of making what I initially wanted to, I can still get why it was popular and why it resonated so much with fans. Since just like me when I made that video, there are a lot of people who feel like they're almost wrong for considering something good. Like they enjoyed a series, they enjoyed the cast or the stories, it did something special for them, and yet time after time they're told that's not only a controversial opinion, it's the wrong opinion. Because it's quote-unquote objectively bad. It's not that you just see something in it that other people don't, or can find value where others can't, it's that you objectively have bad taste. And that's not a good feeling, especially when you don't have the words to articulate what you like about it. You know, you can tell you enjoy it and that it has something meaningful you connected with, but unlike you, all the people who don't like it have mountains of arguments and videos to back up their stance. So if you decide to say you like something without having proper rebuttals or don't know how to express what you liked, it's gonna make you feel stupid, like you do have bad taste, like you were wrong for enjoying something and finding worth in it. I know because that's how I was. For years, I heard that Fairy Tail was the worst thing ever, and since I didn't know how to respond, eventually I started leaning into that same mentality since I figured, hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the only reason I enjoyed it was because it was one of my first anime and I had nostalgia bias. Maybe I was just a dumb kid who didn't know any better. But that video by Nuxtaku made me see things differently. I mean, say what you will about the guy nowadays, God knows I have, but I can't deny that if it weren't for his video, I wouldn't have realized, wait, I do like Fairy Tail. There is something here that makes it more than just slop. And I didn't know how to say it without pretty much parroting him, seeing as I'd never tried to look that deep into a series before, but it did make me want to be honest with myself and let out that yes, I like Fairy Tail. I love it even. I know that's not a popular take and I don't have rebuttals for every issue, but I still love it all the same. And that's why I think fans of Fairy Tail liked it so much. Not just because I was being positive about it, but because I was being honest that I liked it without feeling the need to water it down by saying, I know it's trash first. Since I don't think it's trash. I never have. And I don't like the idea of having to downplay my opinions for the sake of social validation. I don't like having to hide behind this mask of self-awareness so everyone knows I have valid taste when that's not really what I believe. Like, I'll hear people say, I know X is bad, but I still like it for reasons that go beyond irony, and I won't think, wow, that person has a grip on the way things are. I'll think, wow, this person's been beaten into the dirt so hard they can only feel safe expressing what they feel through an asterisk and a wink. But they shouldn't have to if they know how they think. See, really, what it comes down to for me is this. Can you justify your opinion to yourself? Not to anyone else, you don't have to justify it to them, but can you explain to yourself, in your own words, why you feel the way you do about something? Or are you just mindlessly repeating what you've heard from someone else without really thinking about it? It doesn't have to be the right opinion, you don't need to have the correct take, it just needs to be yours. What do you think? Why do you think it's good? And that's a big part of why I've wanted to make this video for so long, since, yeah, a lot of it's meant to refute these issues I've always thought were invalid, or at least exaggerated, but more than that, it's meant to help me come to terms with my own feelings about the series, knowing that it does have problems. I don't disagree with every criticism that's been made about it, but at the same time, I can't just throw it away. There's something about it that stuck with me for all these years after I watched it, and while I couldn't quite get it the first time I tried to say as much, now, I feel like I have. And if I helped you to clear up your own feelings about it too, then I'm glad you got the clarity I was always looking for. I've been Just Stop, and I love Fairy Tail. Thanks for watching.